Getting ready to go live to Facebook. Very excited. Oh, and then I'm going to mute myself briefly.
Separation anxiety.
And here we go. We are live on Facebook. The chat is starting. And Ivana Taylor here, and I want to welcome you to this week's edition of Bizapalooza Chat. Today we are plugging in with a really, really special show. Today, it's all about making your family business last. Now, I know that so many, almost all my clients and folks that I know that are running a business have actually inherited that business from a mom or a dad or from both of them. And keeping that business running, I think I had one client / friend say to me when I said, what is your number one goal for this business? And this man basically said, not to screw it up. Well, you're in luck, because we have an amazing guest today. Our guest today is Mitzi Perdue. Let me show you the book. She's written this book of how to make your family business last through the generations. And she knows what she's talking about, because believe it or not, Mitzi is the daughter of the founder of Sheraton, and she was married to Frank Perdue, the chicken guy. I'm so excited. So without further ado, I am just going to spotlight here on Mitzi. Welcome, Mitzi.
Hey, what a pleasure to be here. I love it.
I'm just like thrilled. I'm so thrilled. And I thought it was really interesting that when we started this conversation and I shared my heart of how I really didn't get who you were until I cracked the book open. And the first thing you said to me is you were the chicken lady. So I thought that was interesting. So how did you define yourself beyond being Ernest Henderson's daughter and Frank Perdue's wife?
Well, see, in my career, I've been in real estate, but I guess some of the most fun part of it was I was a rice farmer. I mean, you can clearly tell by looking at me that I was a rice grower, right? For at least 17 years in California, I grew rice and got very involved in women's agricultural politics. I became president of the oldest and largest farm women's organization. And that led to a job in writing, where I worked for Scripps Howard for probably a couple of decades almost, writing about the environment. And so I am a businesswoman, I'm a rice grower, I'm an author and a syndicated columnist. And then, of course, what I really, really love is that I'm a mother and I'm the wife of Frank. I'm the widow of Frank Perdue. And my late father did found the Sheraton hotel chain.
That's just so, I guess what I'm kind of interested in is your experience with family businesses. I mean, you've been a part of both. Big significant components of your life have been involved in family businesses. So talk a little bit about your history with that.
Right. I've mentioned that my father was the co-founder of the Sheraton Hotels, but that was not the beginning of the family business. The family business started in 1890, 127 years ago. And our family has stayed in business, and we sold Sheraton about 50 years ago, but we invested it in other things, which means that we've been together as a business family for 127 years. The Perdue family also has a great record of longevity. Perdue Farms, the chicken poultry company, began in 1920, and we've just celebrated our 97th year. So together, I've been part of two families that have been together for 224 years. And, you know, I mentioned that I was a rice grower or a syndicated columnist, but what really captures my heart right now and what I want to do with the rest of my life, I have watched, as I'm sure that our fellow tweeters have, that most family businesses don't make it to the next generation. And the reason usually is some kind of family dynamics problem. Well, I wrote the book, How to Make Your Family Business Last. I wrote it because I've observed two families that put enormous effort into having the family business last. And I know from them, and then from academic studies and from just being around, some of the things that make a family last and some of the things that make it fall apart.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think, and it's been a while since I've seen a Purdue commercial, but I thought that I saw one that had the son
Yes.
involved.
In fact,
Is that correct?
We have the fourth generation in the ads now, which I'm so proud of.
I mean, that's fantastic. And not to make a joke about it, but
Oh, go ahead. I'm used to them. I like them.
No, I have not a chicken joke. But what I think is interesting is there was an old quote that I heard someone say: the number one way to make your business profitable is to have profitability as a goal. So my question for you is the number one way to have your family business go from generation to generation is to actually have that as a goal?
Mm-hmm. I totally endorse that goal, but I don't think that's what makes family businesses last. I think what makes family businesses last is the culture of the family. Do the kids learn from just the youngest age that they can't always get their way, that they have to work hard, that they have to be frugal, that they can't be addicted to being right and thinking, I always get my way, that compromise is key. They have to learn just from the youngest age not to be selfish, that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And if you leave that to accident, golly, only 30% of family businesses make it to the next generation, and it's 3% make it to the fourth generation. But the Perdues are fifth generation and the Hendersons are seventh generation. So yeah, there are tricks and techniques and just ways of embedding the culture so that the family business will last.
So I'm kind of curious about this, because as I was putting the questions together, one of the things that occurred to me was, entrepreneurs start businesses, right? And I'm kind of curious, from your experience, do they have every intention of having it go forward, or does it develop into a family business? Like, what happens or at least maybe what you know from the histories of the companies you've been involved in, what happens, like how does it evolve to where it really does become something worthy of passing on?
Let's see, I think you asked if the patriarchs that started the whole thing had any dreams of having it continue forever.
Yes.
John Henderson, who started the business in 1890, and it was a real estate business, which did grow into Sheraton hotels, which then grew into still other things. I think he was looking to the future because he did something so clever that I would recommend to any family business that wants to last. He endowed get-togethers, as in we had the Henderson family dinner that's been going on for 127 years. Each year we get together, the family's in the hundreds now, but we still get together. And he must have had longevity in mind when he established in perpetuity the Henderson family dinner. And that's actually grown into the Henderson family weekend. And Frank Perdue established and endowed get-togethers. Actually, it's better than that. It's family vacations every 18 months where the whole family, and it can be 60 or 70 people, travel together. And it might be to a dude ranch out west, or this year, oh my gosh, we're so lucky, we're going overseas. So, Frank, I know, totally wanted the family business to continue. In fact, he even told, I read a family newsletter, and he told me, and it's printed in the family newsletter, right from the beginning, probably from 28 years ago, the most important thing we can do as a family is the things that keep us together as a family. So yeah, they firmly have it in mind that they want it to continue.
So it sounds like these get-togethers, these regular get-togethers, are an opportunity, and I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about that. In fact, I'll ask you to sort of elaborate on that. Having that, and you talked about it, the culture, there has to be a family culture. You talked about having the children learn to be a certain way, to not expect things, maybe just hand it to them, to have these get-togethers. Say more about maybe what some of those ingredients are of very successful family businesses.
Well, I'll tell you the number one that I just think is so important, and both my families hit on it by accident, but today there's a lot of academic research that says this is important and do it. The families that last the longest and are the most high functioning are the ones that spend enough time together so that they know the family stories. And when I say that there's academic research behind this, my friend Robin Fivis from Emory University in Atlanta, she's discovered in the family narratives laboratory that she runs that the highest functioning families are the ones that know their stories. And oh, I've got an offer for our tweeters. I have on my website a place where you can get more information, including a 20-question quiz that's sort of like a way of assessing how well your family's doing. And the quiz, it asks questions of things that you might know about your family, such as how did mommy and daddy meet? What were their favorite subjects in school? What sports did they like? And they're just a whole host of questions. And if you get lots of them right, the odds are your family's doing really well. On the other hand, if you only get like 3 or 4 out of the 20 questions right, that's a wake-up call of we need to spend more time together. And interestingly, the same information about spending time together, that's also highly protective against substance abuse. There's research out of Columbia University, the Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. They've discovered that the families that have 5 or more meals together, those families are much more resistant to substance abuse than the ones who have, say, 1 meal a week together. And, I know that it can be really hard for a family. It's a sacrifice and it takes a lot of effort, and maybe it's almost impossible. But still, if you can have 5 or more meals together, that's a way of ingraining and embedding the family culture. You're not likely to have a whole lot of success making the family culture continue or the family business continue unless you spend time together. So family vacation's great, but even more important, meals together. Oh, and I was going to give you the address where
give me the address here.
Write to Mitzi, or not write, go to www.mitziperdue.com and scroll down and you'll find the 20 questions, and they're free. In fact, there's a whole bunch of freebies on my website, so I'd love you to come because I wrote this book because I wanted to help families have the happiness of being together and being high functioning.
So, we spent some time talking about what makes a family business successful and all this together time. And then you mentioned yet only 30% of them survive and even fewer go from generation to generation. I can assume that they're not doing these things. What are the things that maybe that they're doing that's killing their business?
Well, I think for one thing, oh gosh, I see this over and over again because I'm a public speaker and I attend a lot of conferences and I advise families. So the thing that I just see over and over again is they put all their effort into making business grow and making the business be a success, but they forgot what it's all for and what it's, what really, really counts by the time that you're in your 70s or 80s is what's your legacy? And I was talking with a man at a family business conference. I think he was in his 70s, and this man was contemplating ending his days because for the following reason, he had a fabulously successful business. He was incredibly wealthy, but he had 2 sons. Both of them got involved with alcohol. He tried tough love and it didn't work. So that now at this moment, neither of them will speak to him. His wife left him over the arguments with the kids. And now he thinks, I've had all this financial success, but I failed as a family. And, I hope he snaps out of it. When I was talking with him, he felt that his whole life, that all his effort, that it meant nothing because he didn't have a family. So that's the sad part. But the good part is there's a lot of things that he didn't do that we all can do. And number one is just recognize that, you want to build your family business, but you want to build it for a reason. You want it because you want your family to be high functioning and loving and supportive and something that you can hand it down to future generations.
So what do you do, Mitzi, if your kids don't want to be in the business? You got lucky with Purdue that that there are kids that are interested.
Well, actually, may I interrupt?
Please.
I'm not sure that I'm going to assign it to luck because we try from the youngest ages to have the kids realize that the business is exciting and nice. Like we have tours of the plants, and say even the 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, they get to see the baby chicks, and just, we all get together and we have a fun time. I instituted, actually in both families, an education committee. And the education committee, we have newsletters that were geographically dispersed from California to Maine. But so how do you get the youngest family members to realize that this is exciting and wonderful? Well, I created newsletters. I have newsletters for adults and newsletters for the kids. The newsletters for the kids, they're usually a page or two, and each one has some little lesson. Like if I'm trying to teach frugality, I'll talk about how great-grandmother Mommy Do, how for Thanksgiving she'd love to have people come over, but and should cook for maybe 50 or 60 people. But when she was, say, baking sweet potato biscuits, should bake them in aluminum foil. When the biscuits came out of the oven, she wouldn't throw the aluminum foil away. Should clean it and fold it and reuse it. And the lesson there was being frugal. Other ones talk about how great-great-grandfather founded the company and what it was like and what his first jobs were. And so just almost month by month, they're going to learn really neat things about where they came from and why it's important. And there will always be fun activities to accompany it. One of the easiest is the Perdue logo. For one issue, it was a few months ago, I sent them pictures of the Perdue logo, like from a coloring book almost. It was the outline of the logo, but it wasn't colored in. And I sent them along with it kind of as a gift, because every month they're not only going to get a newsletter addressed to them, they're also going to get gifts that go with it, because I want them to be excited to get these things. And that it's a really red letter day when one of the newsletters comes. Well, in this case, there's the picture of the logo, and I think there's like 58 crayons that go with it, a really elaborate, nice set that they want to have. And I invited them to color in the logo. And then I explained a little bit about where the logo came from, how their great-great-grandfather wanted to have it red, but his advisor said, no, blue and yellow will be better. Your customers will like it more. And Frank Perdue listened to his advisors and did what they said. And then I invite the kids, color the logo that you think would be prettiest. And then see if the blue and yellow one is better. Well, those kids, including, they're going to spend time with their parents talking about this, but they're going to know more about the company, and it increases their engagement with it if every month there's something about the family or about the business that they get to know. So we don't leave it to accident. People are dying to, or not dying, but many are eager to join. But of course, there are those who aren't eager to join, and we love and embrace them too. Because, for example, one of my great-grandchildren is a musician. Another is an artist. And they enrich the family. They each add so much to the family. But they all, every family member knows that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And, in one way or another, we love them, and I think they love us.
I think that's so interesting, because it ties together with one of those success factors, which is knowing the family history. And I think the other thing that you're talking about that I see a lot of folks do, either kids are not involved in the business early enough and then they get pulled in at the end, or it just isn't anything fun, right? If you have a restaurant, maybe you had to wash dishes. I don't know. It's just whatever it is, doesn't make you excited to be
I think
a part of it.
Newsletters do. And by the way, since I'm a professional writer, so it's easy for me to write newsletters. But one of the books that I wrote that you can find on Amazon, it's How to Communicate Values to Your Children So They'll Love It. Well, I wrote a series, I guess it's about a couple of years worth of newsletters where you can fill in the blanks for how it's appropriate to your family, where it has ways of, as you go through the book, you can pick out, there's a new baby in the family. Well, I teach, kids don't know how to accept things. You teach them how. And so in the newsletter on when there's a new baby in the family, I talk about how excited we are, how this is somebody that you can love and play with and take care of and grow up with. And so that it's planted in their minds that, oh, aren't we lucky to have a new family member? And then, of course, there will be activities that go with it. Maybe it's magic tricks, or maybe it's little science experiments or something. But as a hobby, or actually by now it's professional, I study persuasion and I study how to embed cultures. And what I've just been describing, the newsletters with the gift that go with them, and every activity that goes with them, usually takes about an hour. And I have the kids I send the kids costumes with their treasure chest for each month, the treasure chest of activities. And this means that there's just guaranteed time that they're going to spend time with their parents or maybe grandparents or whoever. And during that time, they are going to learn family stories. They're going to learn family culture. They're going to learn family values such as being frugal, being modest, that you don't always get your own way, that just one way or another, they're going to learn values that's going to help them be happier people.
I think that's interesting. One of the questions that the folks are answering right now is I'm going to combine the two questions together. One is, what makes a family business special? And what makes a family business different from a non-family business?
Well, let's see about an answer.
Other than the obvious, right?
Okay, for what makes a family business special? Okay, I probably have 6 answers for that, but maybe what comes to my mind first. I think we all go through life looking for identity. Who are we? What are we here for? And I think a family business does a remarkable job of giving a ready-made answer for that. If like me growing up with Sheraton, we just knew that so many things were influenced by the fact that we were with Sheraton or in the Perdue family. It's something bigger than us. It's something that holds the family together. I love family businesses. I would wish it for everybody who has the temperament to want it. I mean, it's, to me, at its best, it's an engine for making people happy.
Wow. I think
at its worst, it's an engine for making people miserable.
Right. I get there. You have both sides.
Okay, so my urgent advice to absolutely everybody is, don't leave it to accident. If you don't put effort into teaching the kids the values that are going to support being a high-functioning family, you just got to do it, because if you leave it to accident, you're likely to be in that 70% that don't make it. I mean, it's tragic when there are 2 roads. One road is happiness, joy, supportiveness, high functioning. The other road is misery, quarrels, horror. And take the road that leads to happiness, even if it takes some work and some effort. But don't leave it to accident.
Don't leave it to accident. I think that's really, really wise. And, I worked for a quote unquote family business where, the family, they had kids involved, but the kids weren't as involved. But, what was real interesting about what you said is the employees had such an incredible connection to the family. So the son of the founder, who was there but had grown up there, right? But let's say he wasn't there all the time. As he got older, had his own family. He wasn't there all the time, but he was there. And what I thought was fascinating is that the company had transitioned into a quote-unquote professionally run business as opposed to a family-run business. But as long as that son was around, he had like a magical aura about him. I mean, it was like, if he said, I want all of us to go jump off this bridge, everyone would do it.
I get that, because with both Sheraton and with Perdue, if you started working with Sheraton, or if you started working for my father, and he had 20,000 employees, you probably stayed with him for life. And by a miracle, the same thing is true of my late husband. In fact, is there time for a story, or should we continue?
There's time. Stories are the best.
Okay. This is a story about something that an owner can do, and I don't think it would be as easy for a publicly held company to do. But whenever my father bought a new hotel, and this started out in the 1930s at the height of the Great Depression, people didn't want to buy hotels because they were all going bankrupt. Well, he had a different approach. whenever he'd buy a new hotel, and he'd always be buying the new hotels with the profits from the previous ones, plowing the money back into the business, what he would do is, and I'm just so proud of him for this, and I recommend this attitude to everybody, he'd take over a new hotel. The day that he had ownership of the hotel, he'd ask all the employees to come into the hotel ballroom. And in the hotel ballroom, he knew ahead of time, because he was a very empathetic, he had enormous emotional intelligence. He would know that every employee there is worried about, am I going to keep my job? Because after all, when a company goes bankrupt, you'd expect the new owner to hire his friends and clean house. But my father would stand up there, and almost the first words he'd ever say is, every one of you gets to keep his or her job. I know that you know this hotel better than anybody else, and I don't think an outsider could ever do as good a job as you can. And my sole purpose right now is to give you the tools to show me just how good you are. And in a couple of years, this hotel is going to be the most popular hotel in the city. And the reason why is you, because you know how to make it great, and I believe in you. Well, that was part one. Part two, when you've taken over a hotel, especially one that's gone bankrupt, you'll almost certainly have to invest a lot in refurbishing it. But the first money that he'd ever spent wasn't on the rooms that the guests would see. It would be on, say, the employee kitchen, the employee locker rooms, the employee showers, the rooms that would signal to the employees that Father really meant it, that the success of the hotel entirely depended on the employees, and he believed in them, and as a measure of that, he was investing in them before he invested in anything that the public would see. And by the way, the genius of that he didn't know what modern research shows, but in modern persuasion theory, there are two approaches he could have taken. One is, you shape up or you're going to be fired. Well, they'd probably try to work pretty hard because they didn't want to be fired. But that would never have the loyalty and the commitment and the going the extra mile that comes when you show the employees a better vision of themselves. And that's what he did his whole life. He showed people a better vision of themselves. And Frank Perdue, by the way, was equally on the lookout, and every time that he could find, of ways of showing the employees how important they were to him. And one of the ways that I had a little bit to do with, we had a program for inviting every single person, and there were 20,000 of, funny, both Sheraton and Perdue employed the same number of people. Frank Perdue and I had a goal of entertaining every single person who worked for the company in our home. And so week after week, month after month, year after year, would have 100 people at a time, and would have, it could be the truckers, it could be the veterinarians, it could be the secretaries, it could be the accountants, but 100 at a time, would have them at our home for dinner. And Frank did something that I just thought was amazing for somebody who was the head of a company that large, would have a buffet. Of course, we serve chicken, but at this buffet, he would stand behind the buffet line and he would serve his employees. And then at the end of the evening, he would tell them, he'd give them current information of what was going on in the company, so that they could feel really, really part of what was good and what was a challenge. But then he'd always end the evening by saying, in one way or another, it would be this thought: I know that the company wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for each of you. And communicating to people that they're important. There's a quote that I just love from the great psychologist from 100 years ago, William James. And he said, the deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation. And both men knew how to show that the employees were appreciated and they were all important, and that at every level, they were what made the company great.
It's like the Dale Carnegie principle, isn't it?
Oh, isn't that amazing? Both men were Dale Carnegie fans. Both took the course. Both would read the books, and both of them would encourage their employees to take the Dale Carnegie course also.
Mitzi, it's a great investment. I met my husband at a Dale Carnegie course.
How fabulous. No, I've taken 3 Dale Carnegie courses. I took the salesmanship course, I took the management course, and I took the speaking course. So I'm
right there with you. But
Dale Carnegie ought to love, we've got to get Dale Carnegie to listen to this, because what testimonials we're all giving.
Right. But I have to ask you this question. It's been on my mind, and this is the perfect time to ask it. How did you meet Frank Perdue? How did these 2 great family businesses get together?
Oh my gosh. I was living in California at the time, growing rice. He was living in Maryland, but there was a party in Washington, D.C. that both of us attended, except there was a problem because I had to leave early and he arrived late, and we only overlapped by 10 minutes. But during that 10 minutes, we decided to marry.
Just like that?
Well, no, not exactly just like that, because the first 5 minutes, both of us had been divorced, and both of us had some unfortunate previous, I had a very unhappy previous marriage, and he had been married twice. The first marriage, I think, was a great marriage, and it lasted 37 years. But he did marry somebody else, and that was an unhappy marriage. So because I'd had an unhappy marriage, he had had an unhappy marriage, both of us, when we met, were agreeing that we would never consider the thought of the possibility, the notion of remarriage. And we were just agreeing on that for the first 5 minutes, each topping each other with how much marriage was a terrible thing. But then, somewhere around 5 minutes, we began talking about, would never remarry because, it was a terrible institution. But that did mean that we'd have to grow old alone. But that was our fate, because neither of us would ever trust anybody again. And then Frank looked down at me and he said, I believe I could trust you. And I looked up at him and I said, I believe I could trust you. And we agreed to marry. And so the next 5 minutes were spent talking about what our marriage would be like. It would be supportive and not competitive, and would be there for each other when the good times and the bad times. And that's exactly how it was for the next 17 years until he passed.
That's wonderful. And I think what I find so inspiring is how you have really, really taken on this mission of engaging the families and the children. Now, are you sort of like disconnected from the Sheraton side? Do you do something similar like you do for the Perdue side with the kids and getting them engaged?
Yeah, actually, I feel as if I live in 2 parallel universes, because both families have remarkably similar attitudes. Both families don't like conspicuous consumption. Both families are frugal. Both families put a huge ultimate value on being honest and being trustworthy. And my role in both is I write the newsletters. In both families, we have the Service to the Family Award. And I played a role in both of those in instituting these awards. And for any large family, I totally recommend a Service to the Family Award, because it's a way of embedding the culture. When you're competing to do the most for the family, people are thinking in that direction rather than just thinking selfishness and what can I get out of it. I figured that one of the things that I could bring to the Perdue family was the experience that I had in the Henderson family of some of the things that we did that kept us together generation after generation. And the first one was endowed vacations, and the second one was philanthropy. Both families are hugely philanthropic, and that's such glue that keeps families together. Mm. And then I write newsletters for both, and then the Service to the Family Award.
Got it. I think that's wonderful. And I think we've talked a lot about intergenerational things. Let's talk a little bit. I'm sitting here looking through my questions, which is why you see my eyes going over and over. We talked about, I'm going through trying to find a really good question to ask.
Don't worry, I'll make up one.
Right? Because I don't want to miss anything that's really good. You talked a lot about communications. That was part of our little question and answer thing, where you've talked about, putting in structures for communication. What
I put a lot of effort into that, and this is something that I'd recommend to any business family. I'm going to give you an example from Frank Perdue. Frank Perdue initially felt that nepotism was the most terrible thing in the world and don't do it. And although the most important goal for him was to be a close family, he initially was sort of making an effort to keep family members out of it. But he went to an outside expert. His name was John Ward, asking for just advice of how to make the family successful. And John Ward said, encourage everybody that you can to come into the family. And what I like about that story is Frank didn't feel that he had to know everything by himself. He was very into getting advice from others, paying for advice and following it. And so I recommend that to everybody. If you want your family to last, you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. There are books on the subject, but there are also family advisors. There's a whole ecosystem of family advisors. And if you hire somebody who's seen 2,000 other families, the problems that you're likely to come across are predictable in most cases. I mean, whether the problems are succession or somebody's having a substance abuse problem or an in-law problem, whatever problem you've got, if you have somebody who's seen 2,000 other families, they probably got some good ideas what to do about it. And so I guess one of the structures that I put in place right from the beginning is, if you need help, ask for it, and ask for it early on. Don't ask for advice after the barn is already burned down.
That's such great advice, because now I did know one woman here locally that specialized in assisting family businesses. Where and how do you find these advisors that have that kind of experience? The experience with maybe working with different kinds of family businesses, advice that you can trust, not just some consultant that comes in off the street.
Well, I'll tell you how Frank went about choosing advisors. And this was before the internet. Today, I've got the names of probably a dozen or 24 people from the internet. But Frank made sure to interview every single person, and then on top of that, he wouldn't just ask for references. If he was talking with somebody who was a reference, he'd ask that person who was a reference, know anybody else who worked for this or who hired this guy? So he'd have references and references to make sure that he got the right guy. And, it's part chemistry, part experience. But I'd go very heavily by references.
Absolutely.
Because for one thing, when you hire a family consultant, what you really want is somebody that will be with you over the years. In our case, John Ward was with us for probably 20 years, and then he retired. But that was okay, because he had a company, and there was somebody in his company, Jennifer Pendergast, who took over. And she had all the institutional memory of what she'd been advising on before. So I guess a really strong recommendation that I'd have, or let's make it 2 recommendations. 1, get outside help, because you just don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you're probably not going to get a very good wheel if you invent it yourself. Instead, go to a professional who has some experience in this. And then number 2, research the heck out of who you finally select. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand and wish everybody something good, I'd say investigate at least 5 and maybe 10 before you select one, because you really do want it to last not only your lifetime, but the future as well. It's a big choice who you make for a family counselor.
So one of my favorite things that we talked about in this conversation is how, the whole Dale Carnegie thing and making folks feel appreciated. That's a great management philosophy.
It's fantastic, because you want employee engagement, and people who don't feel appreciated, they're going to start looking elsewhere. And by the way, can I jump back to something that you said earlier? You were talking about advantages of being a family business. As members of family businesses, family members can play such a role in this business of making the employees feel important. Like in the Perdue family, At Christmas time, instead of exchanging gifts ourselves, we frequently find out from human relations, if there's been a flood or a fire or just some case where their employees, we call them associates, who could use some encouragement. And then instead of giving gifts to each other, we send 70 or 100 gifts to people who could use some encouragement. And I love the fact, I think it's wonderful for the employees, but I really think it's so good for the family members, particularly the children, to have them see modeled behavior of caring, and that it's about giving, not just taking.
Do you think that it's that kind of philosophy and value system that has, it's generated the kind of success and growth, that having those sets of values of humility and caring for others, and can I say putting employees first? Maybe that's the next question to ask. How do you balance, because that's the ongoing conversation. Should we focus on focusing on the customer, or focusing on the employee? So right now I'm sensing you're kind of focusing on the employee, and that's creating a great customer experience. Is that what happened?
Okay, again, my feeling, and this is copying a direct quote from my father, it's the employees at every level in the entire organization that make the organization a success or not a success. And so, I love the phrase, embrace the healing power of and. So I'm going to say employees and customers, but if you put a gun to my head and said, Mitzi, you've got to choose one first, I'd put it the employees. But I'd have the employees realize that they're part of an organization that, this is an expression from Frank, that fawns over the customers. The customers are why we're in business, but Frank can't go around and visit every customer, but the employees can act with them. And so Perdue Farms puts an awful lot of effort into appreciating and valuing the employees, but I think the employees know that we wouldn't be here if the customers weren't happy.
I think that's so important. That
I'd like to embrace the healing power of and.
I am with you, right? Because I think, especially as business owners, oftentimes there's so much overwhelm and you feel like I can do this or that. And I think there's a lot of power in when you say, well, how can I do this and that? That's always.
But again, if I had to say which I thought was more important, I would put my effort first on the employees.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I remember seeing a study way back in the 80s where this was a big conversation in management circles, like, should you be employee focused or customer focused, and which is better? And they actually found that companies that had made the decision to, value employees, to focus on employee engagement, did really well. And that's actually over the decades proven to be so.
Well, actually, back to my story about how my father, when he'd take over a hotel, and that the first money was spent on the employees and refurbishing their areas. And again, that was to signal to them that he valued them. And I think it must make a big impression on an employee who's been in a bankrupt hotel to see the employee cafeteria looking great, or the showers. We used the same decorator for the rooms that the guests saw as the ones that the employees used. So our decorator back then, her name was Mary Kennedy, and her assignment was, when we took over a hotel, she goes and makes the employee areas look great, including like the same shower heads that you would have if you were a guest, the same toilet fixtures as if you were a guest.
And that makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to digress a little bit to shift the conversation over. I want to talk a little bit about boundaries, because it seems from what you're saying that a family business could really be all consuming. And how does a business owner who has a family business, how do you create healthy boundaries? So where family time is family time, business time is business time. Are there advantages and disadvantages to that?
Okay, now, total honesty, I'm a horrible person to ask on that, because how about I fail? But let me try my best to answer anyway. When Frank and I were married, before I was widowed, we never had a conflict over that because he felt that he never worked a day in his life because he loved what he was doing so much. And I loved being part of it so much that I think an outsider would have said, gee, what kind of life do you have? Because at his level, where he was both the company's spokesperson and he was also, the head of the company and pretty much the founder of it, I would say that an awful lot of our time was spent related to the business. But on the other hand, I loved it. I enjoyed it. Because like even evenings at home, I mentioned that once a week would be having 100 people at a time. But that was just the beginning, because would also be entertaining customers, would be entertaining people in the community that he cared about. But okay, so as I said,
so it's a calling.
Wait, I have an answer to your question, and it would be an honest
great.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Well, you know what? I think that you've landed on something really important, right? It sounds from the way you answered your question, and not just your answer, but like everything about you. This is one reason I love video. Watching you, I can see that it's a passion and a calling. And one of the questions was, I don't know if it was that the tweeters are talking about or whatever, is like, is there a profile or something of someone who can be successful at a family business, especially given this thing with boundaries? Maybe there are people who are successful who have boundaries, maybe who have a lifestyle business, right? Or maybe, I don't know, it sounds like for Frank, this was a calling, a higher purpose. And the work that you did that could have occurred as work, I don't hear it as work.
Well, my definition of work is when you'd rather be doing something else. And I loved accompanying Frank in what he was doing. My background, as you know, was hospitality industry, hotels. So if we did a lot of entertaining, gosh, that's what I grew up with. That's what I think is the most fun thing in the world. But it was usually business related.
Yeah. So are there folks, like, how do you know that a family business that's going to be handed down is probably just like not going to happen for you? Like cut your losses, go do something else.
That's a hard one, because if you cut your losses too easily, you've lost something really precious. Because my feeling is that anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur has to be willing to put up with long hours, uncertainty, risk, probably a bunch of people saying you're an idiot. So it takes a special amount of backbone. On the other hand, without question, there are times to cut your losses. So your question is, how do you tell the difference between I gave up too early, or
I mean,
gosh, I'm being stubborn and this is stupid?
Or like, I kind of think to myself, it seems to me that some businesses are just more conducive to being family-run businesses. I can see a hotel, I can see a farm, I can see a restaurant, I can see a law firm perhaps, or a doctor's practice or something. And then there are businesses, maybe like a consulting company or something, not as conducive.
Well,
Right.
I mentioned that as a public speaker, I get to go to probably one family business conference a week almost, because I get to speak at them, which I love. Well, I'm trying to think of if there's any business that I haven't seen represented. And certainly in the consulting industry, I know lots of fathers and sons and grandsons. So
Nice. That means that the sky's the limit.
And let me tell you if I've met somebody from that industry who's in a family business.
I guess the other question that's been gnawing at me that we've talked around a bit is this idea of how do you know that I get the impression from my own personal experience. I have a friend, we have family friends I'm in Cleveland, and one of the things that we have here is something called quote unquote Barberton chicken, of all things.
Yeah.
Right.
And we like chicken.
I know you like chicken, right? So we eat a lot of chicken here, and there are these family restaurants, and they were I'm Serbian by nationality. And it turns out that a lot of these restaurants were formed by Serbian ladies in the 30s. And they started these restaurants in the 30s. And my friend's grandmother started one. They were on the Food Network and everything. And when my friend's mom got married, her husband was originally an engineer, and the restaurant was like a single location, right? It was just like a restaurant.
Yeah.
She marries this engineer, and the engineer starts putzing around in the business. And that business, Mitzi, grows and grows. He quits his engineering job.
Yay.
And goes into this business. And, you know, he had found his calling, you know, between organizing and processing and different things. The business grew and grew, and he opened up several locations. And of course, my friends all worked in the business. Tables, dishes, you know, all the things that have to get done. And they go on vacation every year, and I totally relate to a lot of the things that you've been talking about. But I got to thinking to myself, at what point did it get scalable as a family business? Do you know what I'm saying? Like where he's like, wow, you know, when the daughter married the son and the son grew that business, now his son is running the business, but I don't know that it's going to make it. I'm afraid it might get sold or something. And I think the dad had it in him that this is a family business. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you know that you've got something that's pass-onable? That's not a word.
Well, certainly restaurants can grow, because you've been to Benihana restaurants. Do they have them?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, my brother was one of the original partners. In fact, he was the original partner of Mr. Aoki. I can't think of his first name. But the person who brought Benihana to the United States was this guy, Aoki, and my brother became his partner. And that was very much a family business. And Barclay, my brother, and this was, you know, using some of the Sheraton money that we inherited, he opened all sorts of Benihanas. So even though it was a family business, it did scale. But you asked the other question, you know, at some point, maybe it shouldn't, maybe you should bow out and cut your losses. And yeah, that's such a toughie, but I want people to be happy. And if they're miserable and it's going badly, and their wife is about to leave them, or their husband is about to call it quits or whatever, you know, at some point, I guess only looking at your own situation can be the answer. On the other hand, in my own life, if I've got a problem that I'm wrestling with, I'm apt to ask 10 or so people. And even asking for advice is a little bit tricky, because you almost have picked the answer you're going to get when you pick the person that you ask to advise you, because you sort of have an inkling of what they're going to say. But I'm just such a huge believer in not trying to make huge decisions all by myself. I will make the final decision, but I want all the advice I can get.
So unrelated question.
Somebody, you know, I know of case after case of people. Now, say somebody wanted to be a musician and got dragged into the family business and just is unhappy there. Life is short. For that person, I'd say, get out, be who you really are. You know, to thine own self be true.
Is there any benefit to someone that is like maybe part of a family? Let's say you're part of the Sheraton family, but then you went off and you worked in other chains or other related industries. Is there any benefit to folks kind of going out and experiencing other areas of that business and then coming back? Does that happen?
Let me share with you the Perdue approach to this. We feel very strongly that any family member has a right to join the company and be employed after they've worked 3 or 4 years elsewhere, because we want people to prove themselves. I mean, if you're working for Perdue, how do you ever really know that when you got a promotion that you deserved it? But on the other hand, if you've worked elsewhere, you can have a feeling of how you measure up. And I think for the good of the youngster and for the good of the company, it's a fabulous experience for somebody to get experience elsewhere, including that when they come back to Perdue, they'll have something new and maybe that Perdue hadn't thought of to add to it. So again, if I could wave a magic wand and do something that would be helpful to people, I'd wish that encourage youngsters to get experience elsewhere before coming into the company. Now, of course, in a small company, that's not practical, but where it's practical, yeah, do it.
That is great advice. Speaking of great advice, before I let you go, let's talk a little bit more about this book, because I know we talked about a lot of things, but maybe there's one or two parting things you can share with our folks, and then some information about where they can get the book.
Perfect. Yeah, I hope everybody's got is near a keyboard or something, because I'm going to give a couple of ways that they can get freebies. If they'll go to my website, mitziperdue.com, and Mitzi is MITZI.com, or Perdue, and Perdue
Gotcha. I gotcha.
Okay, great. So if they'll go to mitziperdue.com, I have probably half a dozen freebies, including several chapters of my book. And I wrote this book because I wanted to be helpful to people. I've seen the misery when a family business is going badly. I've seen the joy when it's going well. I want to share the tools for how to do this. So for freebies, go there. And then I have another thing that I'd love to offer our fellow members of the tweet world, which is if they'll go to Mitzi Perdue /discount. Mitzi Perdue /discount is going to take them to where they can get my book for $10 instead of $27.95. That's what it costs on Amazon, but if you get it directly from me, I'll autograph it to you or to anybody that you want in case you have a holiday gift.
Great gift idea. Yeah.
And so, the biggest, kind of hint that I can give people is get my freebies from my website. They'll make a difference for you.
Perfect. I really recommend, I have a lot of clients, almost all of them are family-owned businesses, and all of them have struggled with some of the things. And one of the things I love about what you've shared with us today is it occurred to me that the things it takes to run a healthy family is what it takes to run a healthy business. And
Exactly.
The things it takes to run a healthy family business is probably good stuff that you can use even if you don't have a family business.
Well, that's the feedback I get over and over again from people who aren't in family businesses, that the tips on family dynamics are going to help anybody.
I think so. Well, Mitzi, I have to thank you so much for being with us today. I just learned so much, and I love your stories.
Oh, thank you so much. I've loved this. Is fabulous. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed your questions. Love it.
Awesome. So we will end this. Thanks everyone for joining us. Ivana Taylor here, your host for Bizapalooza Chat. Join us again next Monday where we have another exciting guest to talk about your business challenges. Thank you so much for being here. And Mitzi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It was frankly just pure joy. I love talking about this.